into it. We're going to have fun. My name is Dan White Jr. I work for the V3 movement, and we help men and women start new communities. And we've been training people for about 10 years and how to do that. And we do it in a bit of a peculiar way. We don't teach them how to start large. We teach them how to form a discipleship core that builds a social space for mission, and then moves towards mission in a neighborhood or network. And so we help train people from any denomination in that practice. We've been doing that for 10 years. We've trained a little over 600 folks in doing that. And I was just sharing with Ben, as the V3 movement has matured and grown over the years, and is exceptionally passionate about what's happening on the ground. We've had more men and women who are curious and intrigued and hungry for, how does starting a business have anything to do with mission and the gospel and the kingdom, and not out of antagonism, but out of genuine curiosity. And so and I was sharing with Ben, we've seen more and more of that since COVID. There's just been more creative energy around, how do these things come together? And are people doing it? Is it sustainable? And so I thought I'd hook up with my best friend here, Ben, who I know has been doing it. He's a practitioner. He's legit and has started some significant organizations around this. The most recent one that he's really passionate about is Banded. And the way he explained to me is, it's like discipleship for business leaders. It's development for business leaders. And they come together, they cluster together for support and sustainability and development. And he's doing this around the country. And so we're so glad to have Ben in. And Ben Hardman is going to share a bit, just some of his expertise and some of the things he's learning and seeing. And then we'll interact and kind of poke and prod and see what we get together. So Ben, go ahead and
Yeah, thanks for having me,
share with
Dan.
us.
I
Yeah.
feel like a lot of this, as I was looking at kind of some of the stuff I was going to talk about, I was like, man, some of this might, if these people are hanging out with Dan, this might be preaching to the choir a little bit. So I apologize if some of this is stuff that you guys have heard a million times. Just to give a little bit of my background, I've been a pastor for 30 years. I felt like I never fit in the church. So I was always a reluctant pastor. In the fact that I love the church, I love what the church could be. I never was very excited about building a church. I was never very excited about growing a church, and was never very excited about finances, which made me not a great pastor in many ways. And so, in the midst of that, I started doing a lot of coaching and consulting, started a couple consulting firms built around discipleship kind of projects for church leaders, ended up selling those, kind of making a small exit from those. I think when we talk about kingdom entrepreneurship, one of the ways to tell if somebody's an entrepreneur is they're just doing like a billion things. So I used to always think that was a weakness. And I was kind of embarrassed about it, honestly, Dan. I would like try and not share all the things I was involved in.
Yeah.
But I think being a kingdom entrepreneur means you have multiple income streams. It means you're thinking about scale and sustainability, but you're also thinking about impact. Like entrepreneurship is creation. It's creating something that doesn't exist and making it new, which is like the Father. It's what the Father does. It's actually what we've been given dominion to do on earth. And so entrepreneurship can be, I think, one of the most radical ways that cultural transformation takes place. So my newest two things that I've been involved in are Kingdom Dreams Initiative, which is a project where we just really believe that there is a kingdom dream in the heart of every believer. We believe the Ephesians 2 passage, there's a good work that's been prepared for all of us. And the question is, are we living into that? And so we want to help believers live out their kingdom dream. And so we run cohorts to help leaders do that. We help churches run incubators where they can launch 6 to 10 leaders from their church to launch projects and create new things and initiatives for their communities. It's been super, super fun. Work with my friend Dave Warner, who kind of runs that organization. He's up in Columbus, Ohio, amazing leader, doing really cool things with that. And my newest initiative is called Banded. It's peer groups for business leaders, kind of happening all over the country. Lots of fun stuff kind of going on with that. I'm involved heavily in the Grace family of churches here in Atlanta. So we've got 11 churches kind of spread out all over the country, but I'm specifically really involved in the church family here in Atlanta. Love what God is doing there and love kind of calling that church home
Mm.
for me. So Dan, like I'm just going to jump into some stuff, and if
Let's
this
do it.
isn't helpful, you just stop me and start asking questions or something, and we'll go there, because I really do want to just bring some thoughts. And
Yeah.
the way that I was thinking about this was just I spent 30 years in ministry as a pastor, and now I'm a full-time entrepreneur, and
Mm.
I feel like I've learned a lot about how our business leaders think about the church, and
Mm.
how our folks who are entrepreneurs are observing the church and how the church works. And so I'm very passionate about the integration of
Yeah.
business and church, because I really believe, I believe, one, business drives sustainability. And, every nonprofit leader, every pastor I'm talking to are all struggling with finances. And
Mm.
unless you're Andy Stanley, you're trying to figure out, where do we pay the bills? I've got all these ideas that I can't start. I don't know how to get to sustainability. And I think working in the nonprofit world is actually way harder than working in the
Mm.
for-profit world, because you don't have a product that you're selling. You're dependent on the generosity of others. And
Mm.
you're dependent on raising funds. So there's this feeling of like, I'm a full-time fundraiser and a full-time pastor. And sometimes I've got to be more of a fundraiser than a pastor, or sometimes I've got to, lean into all of these different things. But then at the same time, you've got business leaders in your community who actually know how to make money. In the same way that we talk about spiritual giftings, and in the same way that we talk about just gifts that
Mm.
bring to the table, we don't openly talk about the idea that there are leaders who just know how to generate income. There's people
Mm.
who, I just watched, I listened to a podcast this morning,
Yeah.
Dan, and it was a guy who was like, I'm a whatever, they're all talking about how much money they make. I'm making a bunch of money. And if you gave me $100 today, this is what I would do. And so he did this experiment. He took $100 and didn't use any of his other wealth anywhere, didn't use his relationships or contacts that he has, just started fresh with $100 and built this thing. And within 4 months, it was $1 million business. Like, there's people that just know how to do this stuff. And
Mm.
I think when we can merge those together of scale and
Mm.
financing with kingdom ideas and kingdom vision and the goodness
Mm.
that we're called to bring into the world, we help each other in a way that's really generative and really redemptive in my mind. And I
Mm.
think we haven't figured out how to unlock that code yet, but I think that's an
I
important
got you.
code. So the first thing I want to say
Yes.
is I think God has dreams in your church that will never fit in your church. So there
Hmm.
are dreams that God has, and we've always talked about, what if pastors saw themselves as the stewards of dreams? What if they saw themselves as the stewards of the people in their groups? There's all these good works that are prepared for the leaders that are sitting in your congregations week after week. What if your job became to release those dreams, to become a dream factory in your community, and rather than
Mm.
standing up in front of your congregation every week and saying, "Hey, I have a dream, and here's my dream. I want to do this, this, and this for the community." What if you flipped the script on that and said, you have a kingdom dream. God is inviting you to do something in your world, in your community, and I want to be the equiper of that dream. I want to figure out how to
Mm.
make that dream come to life. I want to equip you to live that out. I want to walk beside you in that. I want to disciple you into that. All of those things.
Mm.
Um, so I just think that if our vision for the world is so limited to what we're building in our church and to our own
Yes.
dream, we're limiting what God can produce and create in the church and in the world. And so I'm wondering what happens there. So I just want to give three kind
Yes.
of counterintuitive truths about kingdom entrepreneurship. and talk about these kinds of things. And then Dan, you can interrupt me at any point.
Yeah.
One, I
I
think
actually
God
got a
cares more
question.
about Monday than Sunday. Go ahead. You
I
go
got
ahead.
one. Yeah, I got one quick question before you go into that. Um, so that statement's profound. I mean, the turn of phrase on there are dreams in your church that may not belong
Don't
in your
fit in
church.
your
How did you
church.
say that?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. Does do you find that that's a bit threatening to
Yeah.
a pastor, leaders? Like
Yeah.
it feels a little like, oh, I'm gonna hemorrhage some resources and energy and people if I kind of liberate that vision for being their dreams being
Yeah.
outside the church. Is that
Yeah.
threat there? Have you seen that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as pastors, and I was guilty as this as much of anybody, we carry a scarcity mentality into most of
Right.
what we do versus an abundance mentality. And because we have such a scarcity mentality, it means all of our economic models, particularly in like even in church planning,
Yeah,
our churches aren't really built on a transformative model. This model is not trying to bring the most transformation. The model is an economic model, right? So the model
I
is
see.
how do we like in the church we love sustainability and scale more than we love transformation. And so
Mm,
figuring out how we trust and this is what's so interesting to me about this is I think business leaders understand this better than church leaders is
huh.
if you're genuinely bringing value, income follows it, right? So if you're genuinely loving people, serving people, meeting needs, solving problems, dollars follow that. Whether
I
you
see.
hold those people in your congregation week after week or whether you release them to go start their thing. And so, in my church, I pastored a church in Atlanta, suburb of Atlanta, just north of the city. And we had so many young people that would come and they would just be with us for a season. I knew that they weren't, they're not going to spend the rest of
Mm,
their life here. They're young professionals, they're building, they're growing, they've got a dream,
yes.
help serve that dream in some capacity. And then I was always amazed at how many people would, I would put something up on social media like, hey, we're raising money for this. And I'd get some big check from somebody that used to be a part of our congregation 5 or 10 years ago, but we released them and honored them and served them while they were there. And there's this kind of
I see. Yeah.
reciprocity kind of piece that comes back. I
Mm,
just think business leaders kind of understand that a little better sometimes than church leaders of
yeah.
I can't be so afraid of keeping people that I'm not releasing them.
Yes. That's
Which
good.
I think is part of that stewarding dreams. If I'm seeing myself as like my job isn't just to steward my dream, my job is to steward all the dreams. I'm a shepherd of the dreams.
Right.
I'm a
That's
midwife,
good.
right? Then
Yes. Yes.
then what begins to happen is my dream takes a backseat to everybody else's, which feels like that should be
Mm,
the posture of a pastor anyway.
right. Right. Man, that's good. All right. Continue on. Love it.
Yeah. Uh, God cares more about Monday than Sunday. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir probably with this one. But the real mission field, I think, is the marketplace. I think the real job of the church is to equip the saints to live out their faith in their everyday life and to help those leaders follow it. So if your discipleship isn't preparing people for Monday, then it's incomplete. I
Mm,
see so many churches that are creating their insulated social club where all the relationships are internal, everything's internal facing, everything becomes about the church rather than
I
the
see.
world. And so I
Yes.
really do think the question to ask is my discipleship equipping people for a 9 to 5 mission field? Um,
Mm,
I got a call the other day, Dan, from a guy, a business leader, and he just knew I was a former pastor. And he said, the first words out of his mouth were like, help me talk to my pastor. And I was like, what do you mean? And he said, I was like, just be normal, like just talk to him. And he's like, no, my pastor doesn't understand. Like he
mm,
asked me to help run the sound and be in the sound booth and help run the sound this week. And he's like, I haven't told my pastor that I just sold my company for $200 million. And the guy, like, his imagination for how I can serve him right now is to press some buttons in the back of the room in the sound booth.
Mm,
And I'm sitting here thinking, I'd like to write a big check to help the organization. I'd like to help them start some kind of foundation or some kind of fund or something so that the money I give to the church isn't just spent on more laser lights and people to press more buttons, but it's something generative that lasts longer. And I'd love to have all
yes.
of these conversations with him, but he's so focused on his thing that he doesn't
Mm,
even know what's going on in my world. Um,
mm,
the second thing is that business is not less spiritual than ministry. If we view the sacred secular divide and just remove that and understand that all of us are missionaries, all of us are pastors, all of us are ordained, then the moment you become a follower of Christ, you become his ambassador. And the place that we are ambassadors may be different. You may be an ambassador in your church building or in a nonprofit setting. I feel like I'm an ambassador in the business setting. And so anytime I walk into a Chamber of Commerce meeting or whatever that is with a bunch of business leaders, I know that I walk in representing my Savior and that
mm,
I've got a good dad and I want to tell people about him. And so
mm-hmm.
I think if we only validate church ministry, you're sidelining all of God's people. And we've got
Mm,
to figure out, how do we empower, anoint, um, send business leaders
yes.
into those spaces where it doesn't feel like I live this divided world. I've got my church life and I've got my business life, and they don't
Yeah.
intersect. Um, we
Right.
run these peer groups for business leaders, and one of the discoveries that we've had, and the groups that we run are, you're at about $2 million in your business and have about 5 to 10 employees in your business. And
Mm-hmm.
the thing that we're learning is most of these guys are not connected to a church. They attend a church, but they're not connected there. And one
Yeah.
of the reasons why is they just feel this disconnect between what they do in their 9 to 5 and what's happening on Sunday. They feel like there's a completely different language that's spoken about, and they just don't
Mm,
know how to make that fit.
huh.
So we've got to figure out how to make that fit. And my third kind of counterintuitive truth is that your business owners, your kingdom entrepreneurs, they're your apostles in disguise. That's who they are. Like
Huh.
they are already doing all the apostolic work, and they're really, really good at it. They may not know how to, like, they may not know your context, but they know how to be an apostle. They know how to build something. They know how to create something. They know how to make something. They're
Mm,
pioneers who are already doing the work. They can help you pioneer new things, launch new things. They carry the gifting, but that gifting is kind of like a gifting that's been abandoned by the church. I think that's part of the reason why I felt
yeah.
like I never fit as a pastor, is I just
Mm,
didn't care that much to teach. I like teaching. It wasn't the most exciting thing, and I'm not a very good
sure.
shepherd. I love people. I'm
Yeah.
just not. I don't. I
Sure.
didn't. It didn't gas me up to like take a pie to people from our church every week and sit with them for
Mm-hmm.
hours.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I could do that stuff, but it was kind of dribbling with my
Mm-hmm.
left hand. What excited me about the
Yeah.
church was dreaming. Like, what could we be? What could we do? Finding out the problems in our community and meeting with business
Yes.
leaders and meeting with, lawmakers and figuring out how do we make a change?
Yes.
Those kinds of
Yeah.
things were the things that really fired me up in
That's
ministry.
good.
So if you aren't equipping entrepreneurs, you're missing a part of the fivefold in your church, I think. You're
Yes.
not coming alongside of your apostles.
Wow.
I'll stop there.
That's
Dan,
good. Huh?
anything else you want to?
Oh yeah. 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 I mean, I got some stuff that came up for me just hearing you is what's, so, I'm hearing none of this is new, but it's so energizing to hear it. At the same time, I have a part of myself that's like, um, should I be concerned about people that just know how to make money? Is
Yeah,
there,
yeah,
is there discipleship there that,
yeah. It's like the youth group that only invites the football players and the cheerleaders,
yeah,
right? Like
that's
the
good.
youth pastor,
Yeah.
that's their
Tell me
strategy.
about that. Tell me about
Yeah. So
that
I,
tension, that discipleship. Like, It's just
Yeah.
about, I know how to make money. So, you know,
And there's
um,
people that are making money the wrong way too, and you probably don't want
sure.
them involved in anything. Uh,
Yes.
uh, I think you got to meet people where they are, and so you've
Okay.
got to understand. My job is to meet you where you are, and my job is to help you discern what is God calling you to, what's He saying to you, what's He inviting you
Yes.
into, and how do I help you become obedient to where God is inviting you into. I mean, I think
Yes.
that's the standard job. If there's a job description
Yes.
for a pastor, it's help people discern what God is saying and help
Yes.
them understand how to obey. That's essentially the job of a pastor. And so I think I'm not suggesting that you only go and invest in people that make money or that your board is just the rich people in your church. Like we've all seen
Yeah.
that kind of stuff that just goes really wrong.
Yes.
And I'm also not suggesting that every business principle operates well in the church. Like there are things in the church that we shouldn't care about the bottom line on certain things, and we should take losses in certain things. We're actually invited to
Yes.
be the losers in a lot of ways in our faith.
Sure.
So there are certain things
Yes.
that we have to understand and discern, and there's things that we do in the church that should not make sense, right? We should be following the Spirit
Right.
into dangerous places and stepping into places
Yes.
where according to worldly
Yeah.
wisdom, this isn't right, but according to the co-discernment of what God is doing in this space and what God is saying to his
Yes.
people, this is where we believe obedience is leading us.
That's
Um,
good.
so yeah, I do think there, but I think we've also jumped to the opposite side of that, Dan, where
I get it. Yeah.
um, we don't view giving as a spiritual gift or
Ah,
generosity as a gift. Um,
right.
so when I was a pastor, I didn't know who gave what. So I was very intentional. I never saw the offering, like I saw the numbers, like I knew, what
Hmm.
but I never knew who was contributing what because I never wanted somebody to be able to hold me hostage to that. And I never
Mm,
wanted to view people as a number, right? I just wanted to
sure.
treat people as a shepherd, right? I'm just here to disciple you regardless of who you are. So, uh,
Yeah.
in the midst of that, I was having lots of conversations with people. Um, but I think one of the things that we do with money is we're so afraid of it being
Yeah.
manipulative that we
Yeah.
forget to thank people that are actually being generous. And we
Mm,
forget to come alongside of people who like that's actually a huge contribution they bring to the kingdom and to your community.
yes.
And we need to honor
Yeah.
that contribution in the same way you honor the person that's leading the youth ministry or the person that's running
Yes.
sound or whatever those things are, setting up early every week. And so
Yeah.
I think you've got to have some honest conversations in there. Um, One of the things that I think is really important, and I think um, we did this survey, and it was for a bunch of business leaders, and it was like, what do you wish your pastor knew? What are some things that you would say to
Hmm.
the pastor? Um,
Oh, wow.
and the four biggest things, I'll just read them really quick. Were
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I know how to make money, and you have money, and you need money was one of them. Uh, I know how to
Yeah.
make money, and you need it. It was one of them. Two was stop asking me for money and start asking me about my mission. And the
Uh,
biggest, the somebody wrote on the survey, if you don't know my dream as a business leader, don't expect me to fund yours. And I was like,
oh,
oh,
wow.
that
Oof. Yeah.
that was a hard truth. Uh,
Yes.
but
Yes.
but I think there's just power in having these conversations with business leaders. What's your dream? What are you trying to do?
Yeah.
How's your business doing?
Yes.
And not
Yes.
coming in like you're pretending like you're a business expert or that you've got it all figured out. You're going to give him business advice or any of those
Yes.
things, but just curiosity, generosity, coming alongside.
Yes. That's
Um,
good.
the third thing was that discipleship has to include financial intelligence in some way. Um, the church is
Uh,
the church is woefully anemic in their ability to talk about kingdom economics.
yeah.
I think, I mean, Dan, write your next book on kingdom economics, buddy. Like, somebody needs to be really like,
Yeah.
we've got Dave Ramsey at
Yeah.
nothing. And I'm not
Mm,
going to get into Dave Ramsey, but like,
yeah.
there's just not a lot of
Yes.
books about like
Right.
this is what the Bible actually says about kingdom economics. And so I think there are some resources that are emerging for pastors. I think there's
Sure.
some people that are having really good conversations around that we've got to go back to. And then the last thing those business leaders said, and this is our summary of it, these are not exact words that they said, but it was, we need spiritual fathers and not more sermons. Uh, and it was
Mm,
interesting to see the kind of longing that these leaders had for someone to come alongside of them and just walk with them and guide
yes.
them and direct
Yep.
them.
That's good. That's great. So Ben, your your it sounds like you're inviting us to not outcast entrepreneurs and to actually see their gift is essential to the church, um, not in a way that is just building the four walls of the church, but in a way that's actually discipling them to actually move deeper in mission. Um, what do you, if someone is not an existing business leader, they have an idea,
Yeah.
they're kind of awakening to their own entrepreneurship, and maybe their church just doesn't even have that language, doesn't have the language of, being an apostle, apostolic work, but they're starting to think, I care about this thing.
Yeah.
I think I have an idea and I love Jesus. That startup moment, like what are some things that you see as hurdles when that happens, or see as like these are some things that have to be addressed if we're going to get out
Yeah.
of stuck
Good.
stage or just ideation stage?
Yeah. That's great.
Is that too big a question?
I feel like there were three questions there, but I'll try and
There
answer.
probably, yeah,
I
there
got it.
probably
It's
was,
good.
yeah.
It's a great conversation, one that I'm excited about. All of this is why we started Kingdom Dreams Initiative. Uh,
Okay.
this was a huge part of our heart, and it all birthed out of 30 years for me in local pastoral ministry. I've always been passionate about discipleship, Dan. You know that, and I've always
Yeah.
cared about investing in leaders. I've not always been good at it. And so for me, a lot of my discipleship early on was just like information transfer. It was information
Yeah.
dumps. It was knowledge that didn't lead to wisdom. And it was all involved like groups of men waking up early because the earlier you wake up, the holier you are. And I'd meet with them for like an entire year and then nothing would happen. I mean,
Hmm.
maybe there was something that
Sure.
happened, but I think I went into it with this expectation of like, we're going to do this and I'm going to invest. And then there's going to be this kingdom fruit on the other side of that. And I rarely saw the kingdom fruit. Now, maybe I will on the other side of heaven, or maybe that's happening and I just don't know. And I'm certain that
Hmm.
guys, their
Yeah.
biblical knowledge rose. I'm certain that they are thinking more about being a better husband and father because they're spending time with me, all of those kinds of things. But I wanted
Yeah.
people to build something or create something at the end of it, and no one ever did it. And that's when I
Hmm.
started, hanging out with a bunch of entrepreneurs in Atlanta who were a part of incubators and accelerators and all of those kinds of things. And I started thinking, I
Hmm.
wonder if this is a better model for discipleship for the church than our actual model of discipleship, where
Huh.
the idea is you have a discipleship group where you bring an idea. You view your church as an incubator or an accelerator for those ideas, and you bring in leaders to help them walk through the process of how do I actually build something. So if somebody's got a
Wow.
passion for foster care in your community, it's cool that they're writing checks for foster care organizations, but maybe God's invited them to launch a home for foster children. That's what someone in our community
Yes.
did. And
Wow.
they went from we just foster kids, and that's something we're passionate about, we give to it, to we actually run a home now where there are 3 or 4 kids at a time that are in the home. We're discipling them and caring for them. And we're working with other members of the church to make this happen. And there's this beautiful thing that the church gets to
Wow.
own the story of it. And the church gets to, when I say own, I don't
Yes.
mean that manipulatively, but the church gets to carry this as like,
Yep.
this is what we do. There's something beautiful about that as a pastor too, because you're always looking for mission and you're looking to make a difference, but you have limited resources in what you're able to do
Right.
based on your time and based on your finances. And so when you're creating these kinds
Right.
of incubators, these leaders are going and launching these things on their own. They're
Sure.
funding it and they're leading,
Yeah.
and you just get to cheer. So that, I think that's the first part of your question. Second part of your
Yes.
question is, we've really learned that going from ideation to launch does require a process of some sort.
Okay.
And that process for us is really moving through a really accountable process with leaders who help you build what you actually need to build. And so
Mm.
you do have to think about sustainability. I
Yeah.
I have a special place in my heart for nonprofits. I actually have been spending the last few weeks writing some resources around how
Mm.
nonprofits are kind of discounted in the business world as like,
Yeah.
he
Yes.
kind of just ran a nonprofit kind of thing. Like, I feel like people kind
Yes.
of pat me on the head, like, "Oh, your background, what a nice kid you are." And I'm kind of like, well, actually, some of the things I did, I think count. Like, I think they
Yes.
matter. But
Yes.
the challenge for a lot of nonprofit leaders is they're really good-hearted, but they don't have a plan. Uh,
Yes.
so,
Yes.
the foster care people are really great at taking care of foster children. They're just not great at building a business and building
Yes.
sustainability around it. And it's true for pastors. Like in the church planning world, I think
Yes.
there's a lot of church planners that fail because they're not good pastors. I also think
Yes.
there's a lot of church planners that fail because they're not good developers, right? They
Yeah.
didn't know
Yeah.
how to develop a plan for sustainability. They didn't develop a plan for discipleship. They didn't, all of those things. So I know you guys are talking
Yes.
about all that stuff and training in all of those things. I'm so grateful for the work that you guys do,
Yeah.
which is why I'll always believe and advocate for you guys.
Ben,
But
do you have like is there a book that you would recommend that at least addresses some of that process, or is that purely in training mode for you?
yeah, yeah. So like, I actually wrote a book.
Oh, there you go.
It's not widely.
That wasn't a
It's not.
setup.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate that. I'm really bad at selling my book, Dan. Like, I need advice from you, because I created
Okay.
it. We self-published it with KDI, and
Hmm.
I always forget to even
Yeah.
tell people about it. So like, you're my
Okay.
friend. You should know that I have a book. It's called
Yes.
Where to Start Before You Start, and it's 7 foundational kingdom principles. And it walks through our
Mm.
process at KDI and some of the real
Yes.
particular, and gets a lot more granular on all of this. It's on
That's
Amazon,
great.
so you can go there and grab it.
Love it.
Maybe
Love it.
somebody can find
Thanks.
a link somewhere.
Yeah, I asked that because you know the the angst that I kind of sense in a lot of leaders that have ideas is that they don't know where to start.
Yeah,
They're stuck with this big dream, big concept, big possibility, and eventually it turns into a burden because they don't know how to move it forward. Maybe their church isn't really friendly to that. Their pastor feels like it's a a distraction to mission. And so it's helpful to have resources that at least kind of break open space so that we're not, there's not
yeah,
a mind, kind of a mind constipation there of like, what, I don't know how to move forward in this. My story in this whole journey is developed over the years, and I got better at it the more new starts that I had. But the first one was, we were passionate. This is, oh man, 15, 16 years ago. Exceptionally passionate about caring for refugees in our city. We were a refugee city in Syracuse, and so we were just constantly asking, what do you want us to do here? And it was obvious, it was refugees. We were swimming in beautiful people coming from around the world and struggling to survive. And so we started to get involved in refugee work. And at some point, that's where the idea of like, can we open a space that cares for refugees from the moment they arrive to the moment of a semblance of sustainability? And that didn't mean we did all the work, but we were like, can we create this path for them? And we knew at some point we needed like a designated space to do that. So we were doing training and we went on to have babysitting for their kids. And we realized we cannot afford a building. We couldn't afford a building in our city. And we were doing some of this in houses and it was getting really clunky. And then we ran into legalities and we're like, we need a building. And so this is my first kind of encounter with like, how do we have a building that's sustaining and doesn't tax the refugee work? Like,
Yeah.
I don't want to look at refugees and think, how do I get as much money out of refugees so this sustains?
Yeah.
Right. That's
How do
often
I
what
create a side
nonprofits
hustle
do.
off of this that gets me some income?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that's
Yeah.
the temptation as you start looking at your mission and thinking, how can I make this person who's my mission the person that's funding me? And that's a recipe for
That's
disaster.
why no one has money. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things we thought of is like, is there a way for us to partner and put a business in that building that pays the lights, pays the mortgage, pays the taxes, and then creates space for us to have refugee work in the off hours and other places. And that was our first experiment at bringing both mission and the marketplace together. And it was sustainable for still is to this day, where the top floor is refugee work is happening on the top floor, and then the bottom floor is one of the better coffee
Brilliant.
shops in Syracuse, and
Brilliant.
that coffee shop is funding the work of mission, and um, there we had to explore how those come together, and I remember back then people just thinking those two things don't belong in the same space, or
Yeah.
that seems nefarious that you're using profit to help nonprofit, and it was almost
It's only nefarious if you do it the other way.
I right yeah, the secular divide
Yeah.
was just really hard for people to
Yeah.
cross
Well,
and
I've heard the
see
den
how
of
they could.
thieves thing too, Dan. Like,
Oh,
don't
what's that?
are you selling things at the temple, right? Jesus flipped the
Yeah.
tables because of this, right? So
Yes. Yeah.
how could the church possibly have a bookstore or a coffee shop or
Yes.
whatever? Yeah, I've
Yeah.
heard that
Yeah.
objection as
Totally, I
well.
get it. My second kind of experiment with this was with Kaneo, where I'm at now, and wanting to open a development and healing center. And we did a lot of research on retreat centers around the country. So we wanted to like not be ignorant to like how do retreat centers function, how do they make money, how do they sustain. And we were just absolutely shocked that I think it's like 92% of retreat centers are not financially sustainable. They are hustling all year round to try to fight for fundraising money. They're not generating anything that to sustain.
Yeah.
And we're like, man, that sounds miserable. Like, just I don't think we can do that. And so I came up with the concept of like, what if we had a business operating on site that funded the
Mhm.
work? And as I was sharing that vision, again, had people. It's like breaking the paradox just didn't make sense to them. Is that you can actually have something that's generating income that funds your mission. Um, it was hard. It's a hard concept for people, but ultimately, what it does is it makes for sustainability. And then for us, particularly every retreat guest, I'm not looking at them with dollar signs in my eyes. I'm
Yep.
not thinking I got to get as much out of you so I can survive.
Yes.
Um, People that rent our place for Airbnb and have a luxurious vacation are actually funding mission, and so
So good,
in
buddy.
in allowing retreat guests to come. So my experiment was like just how can the two come together, and um, wonderful. I just wanted to share those with you, just like my
Yeah,
own
no,
journeys
I
in
think your
that.
story is really helpful, Dan, for a couple different reasons. One, I think we get better at this the more we do it. So like
Yes.
I've started 6 or 7 businesses. The one that's the most successful is always the newest one, right? It's always the
Right.
one that I
Yeah.
get better at it every time I do it. And so there are
Yes.
just things that you learn along the way that are
Yeah.
helpful. And so part of my advice to everybody is start small and solve a problem and figure
Yes.
out if there's a need. So there's a business principle that I think is really valuable, and it's so kingdom centered. And that's the idea of fall in love with the problem and not your solution, right? And so
Okay.
we want to
Yeah. Tell me
actually
about that.
design thinking actually starts with empathy, right? So like it's
Yeah.
so interesting. Businesses are starting thinking of like, what are the biggest needs that people have? And how do we solve
Right.
those? And how do we come alongside and serve people in those? And so
Mm,
rather than saying like I'm in love with my plan and my plan's the best, what I'm
I
doing as an
see.
entrepreneur is I'm just trying to create fruit, right?
Yeah.
I'm just trying to create something that is a blessing and serving others and coming alongside of them and saying, hey, is this helpful? Is this good? Is this, uh,
Yes.
and so one of the ways people get stuck in entrepreneurship is they don't know how to start small. So everything is, I need to
Okay.
raise $1 million. I
I
work with a
see.
lot of coaches and a lot of people that are starting. It feels like every former pastor is now a consultant. And so I work with a lot of those guys on starting their thing. And they're all like, I'm going to write 7 years versus of curriculum. And I'm like, no, do one session with 3 people and ask them if it helped, right? Like,
I see. I
start
see. Yeah.
small and then
Small.
as it grows. So that's a huge part of our training at KDI. Those are all principles that are in the book that I've written, and all just, I
Yes.
think, really helpful things to think about as you're starting things. The other thing that we haven't
Ben,
talked
Ben,
about,
keep
Dan,
going.
is like we've got thinking about sustainability for the church. I want to help pastors with financial sustainability for their life.
Yeah.
Like I
Mm,
want to. We've helped a ton of pastors come up with side hustles because their church is paying them, a bag of Doritos and
yeah.
$30 a week or whatever. And like
I
I
get
want
it.
to
Yeah.
come alongside of those guys and say, all right, here's the kind of arrangement you need to create with your church that's equitable, where you say to them, hey,
Yes.
I'm going to be spending a percentage of my time out here earning dollars in the community. Oftentimes, I would suggest a community facing job where you're interacting with
Yes.
community, building relationships so that everything is integrated and doesn't feel like you're living in two spaces. But there's
Right.
lots
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
that kind of imagination that can happen when we view
Yes.
our lives as integrated and we don't view finances as some terrible thing that I'm chasing. Like it's okay for pastors to say, I can't survive on the salary that I'm getting. And
Yes.
I'm not just going to sit here and live in this for the next 10 years. I'm actually going to
Yes.
advocate for myself. And nobody talks about
Yes.
those things. Uh,
Right.
I
I
think
know.
I think that conversation needs to be started of, um, man, there's so many churches that I think are actually like taking advantage of the good hearts of their pastors
Yes.
uh,
Right.
in
Yeah.
ways that aren't redemptive or equitable, and that discussion needs to
Yes.
be had.
Ben, we got a question that came in. I'm curious. I don't know if I fully understand the question, but I'll throw it out there and we can see what comes out.
Yeah.
Finn is asking, can cooperative worker ownership be a part of this? I really would like to leave the master servant ownership behind. Do you know what he's getting at there? Can cooperative worker? Oh, I think I know what he's asking.
Yeah. Help me a little bit because I mean there's obviously ways you can create all kinds of partnerships in the business world with LLCs.
Yeah, I'm wondering
Corporations.
if he's getting at so I own the kind of the model is it's my business. I own all the assets and um you work for me. Is there a way for people to actually have people that are working for you actually have asset and equity and some level of ownership in the business other
Yeah.
than just you? Oh, there
Yeah.
we go.
It's
Finn
good.
says
Okay.
yes.
Yeah. Good question,
Actually,
Finn.
I got something to
I
keep going. Go
so
for it, Ben.
from a kingdom perspective, I think sometimes that
Yes,
makes sense. From a business perspective, it's bad business. So I'll just be
sure.
honest. Like we really
Yep.
encourage people not to give away equity at an early stage of what they're building, depending on
Mm,
what you're building,
hmm.
obviously, right? If I'm building a house
Yes,
for refugees, if the goal is not to make money off of that, the goal is for the ministry to happen. If you're building a business that's
yes,
going to make a lot of money, We
Yes.
we would suggest you got to be really cautious about equity gives, just
Yeah.
because oftentimes what we see people doing, we work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and because they're lonely early on, they're giving a stake of their company to like the website guy or something like that. And it's like
Hmm.
what
Hmm.
they're bringing to the table is very different than what you're bringing to the table. But the good
Sure.
news is like you can do whatever God's inviting you to, right? So
Yes.
like
Yes.
I really believe that our business leaders should be thinking about generosity and should be thinking about all of these kinds of things. So like one of the things that I'm doing
Yes.
right now is I have an assistant who's worked for me for about a year. She's amazing. She's the best virtual assistant in the world. I will not give her name to anybody, but she's so good. And what I'm doing is now I'm helping her start a business where she
Mm.
hires other virtual assistants under her,
Uh,
and I'm sending people to her, and she's
mm.
profiting off the whole thing.
Yes.
And I've got nothing, I'm not taking anything from her in the midst of that. I'm just trying to raise
Yes.
her up and disciple her into some of the things that
Yes.
I've learned along the way because she's really good at it, but she has a
Yes.
limited amount. So she's at her capacity. But
Yes.
she has the ability with more people and with training to launch something larger and solve a larger problem in
Yes.
everything. So I
That's
I
great,
don't know if
man.
that's
That
helpful at
sounds,
all, Finn. I
I think
probably
it is.
didn't
Yeah.
because I don't think I answered the question at all. I think I said yes and no,
Yeah.
which is
I
probably the
think
right answer.
the, I think I have a little bit of experience with this, but it's a bit different for nonprofit than for pure for-profit
Yes,
business. A
absolutely.
nonprofit, you don't own your assets anyways; they're not
Yeah, so it
yours.
doesn't matter.
Um, does
Everybody
it?
has equity.
One of the things that we've experimented with here at Caneo is that we hire locally, and that's a really important um, value for us is
Yeah,
to increase uh, the local economy. And one of the things that we're finding is that the people that we're hiring probably are similar to what you're talking about with your virtual assistant. So we hired someone to clean and flip our rooms. And I realized, man, she could start her own business doing this, not just for us. And
yeah,
so
yeah.
helping to steward and awaken that dream. My gift to, my, I guess our gift to her wasn't more equity in the property because we can't give her that.
Yes,
Was can I actually help you build a
yes.
sustainable this you have this gift. You may not know that it can actually become a viable dream. And so um, that's the way that I
That's
guess
the way
there's
the kingdom
the
economics works, right?
reciprocation.
Like
Yes.
when
Yeah.
God's people get
Yeah.
rich, we all win.
Sure.
That's the way it should be set up.
Yes.
So like
Yes.
the
That's good.
worst strategy to serve the poor is to be poor, right? Like the when
Right.
God's
Yeah.
people when like we should be celebrating when any follower of Jesus hits it big because they're going to be
Yes.
generous with what God is doing and
Yes.
generous with how they got there and all those kinds of things. So
Yes.
like when I was a pastor, I was always thinking about like a coaching tree, right? Like there's the
Hmm.
basketball coach that has all of these other coaches underneath them. And I was
I
discipling
see.
young pastors and then sending them out to go pastor their other organizations. I always loved that. I love doing that. As a
Yes.
business leader, I hope I'm doing the same thing where people are serving with me, serving under me, then going and starting their own thing or succeeding in their own thing. And
Yes.
everybody wins in that process.
Yes. That's so good. What are some of the self-sabotaging things that you see an entrepreneur will do intentionally or unintentionally? It
Yeah.
sabotages their dream, sabotages their movement, sabotage whatever. Like there's
So,
I
I
could
mean, there's so
identify some
many.
exterior things that could sabotage them, but I'm just curious if you see some like psychological or emotional or relational things that they do that kill.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, we could probably go down an enormous list of anything that's dysfunctional for a
yes,
human, you're going to find in
sure,
entrepreneurs. But I do think
yeah,
a couple things that I see pretty consistently. Um, I do think one of them is the imposter syndrome model of like, who am I to do
okay,
this? I don't
hmm,
I don't know enough. I don't have enough. I don't. It's almost like
Yeah.
Uh, I see a lot of, especially because we're in a world where a lot of people are trying to create dollars and get deal flow
Yes.
and all of those kinds of things. And I see a lot of people in that world who like, I'm not legitimate until somebody has donated a certain amount of dollars to us. And so
I
so
see.
then I'm
Yeah.
just less than, or, I hear a lot of
Hmm.
I'm just, uh,
Yes.
and the reality is if God's equipped you and he's called you, then God's you have everything that you need to do that.
Yes.
The second
Yes.
thing is entrepreneurs and apostles are they have a million ideas before lunch. I'm the same
Okay.
way, and so I think dictating and determining what's a God idea and what's a good idea is really important.
Yeah.
The
Okay.
opposite of that, I think you can. I want to be involved in so many different things. I'm like I sometimes will call myself like a spiritual entrepreneur. Like when I hear about what you're doing at Caneo, I'm like, oh, I'd love to do that. That's awesome. I'd love to go hang with Dan and be with pastors and serve them and care. And I hear about what my buddy's doing at another place. I'm like, oh, I'd love to do that. And
Sure.
part of it is what's your gift is you see the possibility in everything.
Yeah.
That can be a real weakness when you spread yourself too thin because you're always
Yes.
contributing bite-sized things. And so
Right.
business, like anything, is really, really hard work. And starting something from nothing takes so much grit
Yes.
and perseverance and work and putting yourself out
Mm.
there, right? That I
Yep.
remember, I had been a part of a lot of different consulting firms, but when I launched Kingdom Dreams Initiative, it was the first thing that had my name up front on it.
Mm.
And I remember how terrified I was around that
Hmm.
because I couldn't hide behind somebody else. And if it failed, I failed. And so
I
there's
see.
all of these
Yep.
things around just, I think business in many ways, in the same way that ministry does, it shows you your lids, right?
Yep.
It
Yep.
reveals who you are and it reveals things about it's very meta in many ways. Like the greatest weakness of the
Yes.
business is usually the weakness that's in you, and you've
Right.
got to wrestle with and I'm anxious, or I have a scarcity mentality, or I don't treat people
Yes.
kindly, or I'm so
Yeah.
busy that I don't have time to interact with the people that I'm supposed to be serving, and all the same
Yes.
things we're dealing in ministry.
Absolutely. That's good. One thing I see, I was wondering if you can address kind of the ADHD of ideas. I
Yeah,
see that a lot.
yeah,
The third thing I see is people that uh, they are afraid to get feedback on their ideas.
mhm, yeah,
There's probably a lot of insecurity there, and so the idea ends up staying kind of in this echo chamber, private
yeah,
space, and then they're trying to do all this kind of work just on their laptop, and someday they're gonna present it to the world
yeah.
as a polished thing. And man, that's a yeah, that's an Achilles heel for a lot
Buddy,
of
and I'm
people.
sure you see that in church planning too, right? The guy that's
Yeah,
got the
totally. Yeah,
800-page strategic plan for their city and doesn't even live in the community yet. Like,
right. Yeah,
yeah, man,
it's
cool.
your ideas have to
These are
be
all,
workshopped with others.
yeah, this is all speculative at this point. So that's
Yeah,
why we
absolutely.
start small, fall in love with the problem, get in there, start
Yes,
working with real people. All of those things are just, I think, really helpful and generative
that's
when you're
good.
thinking about starting
I
stuff.
love it.
Jesse had a really
Ben,
good post here in the chat
where's
where he
that?
said one of the problems, Jesse's one of our coaches at KDI and is a
Get
really great
out.
coach. And he said they
Love it.
see selling as shady and not serving. And I think that's
Huh.
something that's hard too, is you've got to put yourself out there
Yep.
and say, like, I actually think I have a product that brings value. And in order for my
Yes.
business to work, I've got to evaluate that at a certain number and I've got to ask people for a sale. And I think a lot of
Yeah.
Christians, nonprofit leaders have a really hard time with that.
Yes, they do. Yeah, I think that if the my backdoor into helping people understand the value of selling is the fivefold. And so being an evangelist isn't just sharing the gospel. it's sharing what you're excited about, knowing that someone needs that good news, and they need that light, they need that
Yeah, it's
that
great.
peace that you're offering. And so helping people get brave and courageous with selling, sharing, declaring what they have and that you might need this. This could help you, Ben.
Yeah,
Is really,
absolutely.
really important.
Yeah,
So, hey, we're gonna end here. Hard cut off, but this is juicy. This is good stuff. I want to go start another business now. Um,
do it.
Thanks, Ben, for just kind of fire hosing out just a lot of the stuff that you're learning and seeing. And for those who are new to V3, just want to invite you to consider a closer relationship with us, whether you're a church planner, whether you want to start a business as mission. Love for you to explore that. And you can go to the v3movement.org if that's your jam. But thanks, Ben. And
Thank you,
what
man.
was the book? What's the name of your book one more time?
Where to start before you start.
Where to Start Before You Start on Amazon. Wonderful.
My
I'm going
name's
to pick it
Ben
up.
Hardman, Hardman.
There you go. Peace to you.
Thanks, Dan.
Blessings.